Hi and welcome to Saltgrass. Today we're live in the studio and I have two guests here to talk about the proposal to introduce FOGO bins to our shire. And FOGO stands for Food Organics, Garden Organics, and if introduced it would help reduce large amounts of food scraps and garden clippings from going to landfill, which is a big win for the environment. So why would YIMBY, a local group that facilitates community composting and cares about the environment, be asking council to go slow on FOGO? In today's show, we have Toby Heydon, the Mayor of Mount Alexander Shire Council, and Lucy Young from YIMBY here to discuss the pros and cons of introducing FOGO bins to manage organic waste. Before we begin the show, I want to acknowledge that Saltgrass is produced on Jarrah country, the home of the Dja Dja Wurrung. They've been zero-waste ecosystem guardians and custodians of this land for countless generations, and they continue to lead the way and generously share their wisdom on how to live here better. I give thanks to them and honour elders past and present. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Salt of the earth. Salt. Grassroots. Salt of the earth people. Grassroots change. Saltgrass.
Listen to all episodes of Saltgrass on your podcast app or at saltgrasspodcast.com. So before I introduce my two guests, I thought I'd give some background to this issue, because not everyone may be clear on why it's so important to keep organics, food scraps, garden scraps out of landfill. So I'll just do those basics because I think that's the one thing we are definitely all agreed on here. And the question is really how to manage it rather than the fact that we need to manage it. So food scraps and garden waste that get chucked in the regular weekly rubbish bin end up buried with all the other rubbish. And the problem with that is that when they are buried, they still break down or decompose. And the byproduct of this decomposition is greenhouse gases. And if they were allowed to decompose in a garden or a compost heap, it wouldn't be such a problem. But in the anaerobic conditions or the airless, compressed conditions of rubbish dumps, it turns into a potent greenhouse gas called methane, which is much stronger and worse for the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So methane is often cited as being 25 to 28 times more effective at trapping heat in our atmosphere than CO2 over a century. And in the first 20 years of its time in the atmosphere, it's 84 times more powerful. And so in terms of global warming, it's a really big player in that, even if it's just small amounts of it. The Australian Government Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water has on their website a quote, which I'll just read out to you. It says, each year, organic waste in Australian landfills generates about 13 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions, which is a carbon dioxide equivalent. So that includes carbon dioxide and methane and all the others. This equates to approximately 2.5% of Australia's total annual emissions. These emissions can be reduced by recycling organic waste to produce compost. And compost is a valuable product that improves the structure and resilience of our soils. It builds carbon, improves soil biology, and increases water retention. So working out how to stop people from chucking food scraps and garden waste into their general rubbish bin is a really big opportunity to reduce our emissions broadly. And so I think we're all agreed that keeping organic waste out of the bins and landfill is a really good idea. And it's why the state government of Victoria has been setting goals to halve the organics to landfill rate by 2030. And they set the goals, but they've been asking our local councils to figure out how to reach those targets. And FOGO bins, which is Food Organics, Garden Organics bins, are a kerbside service that householders understand and that many councils have introduced to resolve this problem. Mount Alexander Shire is preparing to discuss and vote on whether to proceed with introducing a FOGO bin here. And we have today Toby Heydon, who is Mayor of Mount Alexander Shire. And Toby, can you tell us a bit about what the council's talking about and what a FOGO bin even is, how that works for the consumer?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Allie, and good morning, everyone. So as you said, there are state government targets around reducing greenhouse gases from landfill, and you've described the issue very clearly. So if we go back a step, 2014, the new Andrews government set some climate targets, and around those were greenhouse gas emissions. And so the proposed collection of or proposed reduction of organics from landfill is a process, and there have been various versions of this by different councils. As council is responsible for waste collection, so it falls on council to do its best to implement this change to try and get as much organic out of landfill as possible. The current target is 50%, which some people see as not very ambitious. We're hopeful that we can achieve better than 50% reduction. And currently there are, if we kind of take a broad approach and we think about organisations like home composting or community organisations, community composting groups like YIMBY, then they're achieving much higher than that reductions from those households who participate. So our mission here is to try and provide a service for as many residents as we can, so that's those who have a bin service, to reduce the amount of organics, particularly food organics, but also garden organics, going into our landfill. It costs us a lot more in dollars and cents as well. So it's not just the environmental cost, but the financial cost to us as ratepayers is far higher if those organics are going into landfill, because it costs us a lot more to process landfill than it does to process organics or recyclables.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. And so you separated the food organics and the garden organics, and you were saying the food organics was much more important to keep out. Can you explain that difference?
Yeah, sure. So it appears from data that we have, and I guess just preface this but with a comment that it's, I think generally agreed that it would be that we could have much better data on this, right? Where in a lot of these spaces, as you're aware on your podcast every week, like we're always screaming out for better data, but at the moment it looks like about, if we combine garden and food organics, so kitchen scraps, cooked food, bones, any kind of organic material that comes out of a kitchen, if we think about that and then we think about garden organics, so the garden clippings, rose thorns, grass clippings, whatever it may be, it seems from looking at the data from Shire, and look, the data is imperfect, but it looks like about 3/4 of the methane emissions from landfill are actually coming from food and kitchen organics and not from garden organics. So for me personally, my focus is more on kitchen organics than it is on garden organics. But garden organics, when you think about the volume that a rural shire like Mount Alexander produces in terms of garden organics, then that's a considerable amount of emissions as well.
Yeah. And Lucy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the difference with the methane is simply that the food organics are often a lot wetter and goopier, and so that just decomposes differently to really dry garden organics, which might be dried leaves and prunings from trees and things.
I think the main differentiation, Allie, you would know as a composter, is that one is more nitrogen rich and one is more carbon rich. So the nitrogen decomposes in a way that creates a lot more problems.
And that's the food goopy, scraps.
/ nitrogen.
The technical term goopy.
But there's also a point here about the nitrogen and other nutrients that we find. So if you've got a chicken carcass or something, that's a lot higher in nutrients than, say, the branch of an oak tree.
Yep.
So there's that consideration too. The nitrogen's a huge part of it. But
yeah, and I should put a disclaimer into this conversation that I am a YIMBY composter. I've been a YIMBY composter for several years, and so I know the YIMBY program really well, and we've done a program here on Saltgrass just talking about how YIMBY works. We will unpack it again for those who haven't heard that before, and we'll come to that a bit later in the show. But yeah, so I think we'll come back to the FOGO bins for a minute, and if we did introduce FOGO bins to the Shire, what happens to the food organics, garden organics, once they get dumped into that big truck and get carted somewhere? Okay,
so the model that most councils have rolled out in Victoria and nationwide is where you have sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's fortnightly. I think there might be one or two examples of a monthly FOGO collection, but mostly they're weekly or fortnightly collections, the same as your ordinary bin service. And the idea is that all organics go in the one bin, right? Food organics, garden organics, then they get trucked up to a transfer centre or transfer station, such as Castlemaine, and then compost is produced, or I should say perhaps soil conditioner, because in many of the councils that we've looked at, it's quite a high mix of garden organics to food organics. And I think like listeners can imagine their own household and think about the amount in volume or weight of kitchen scraps each day or each week, and compare that against the amount of garden waste that they could potentially be contributing to that stream. Then you can end up with quite a high ratio of garden to food organics. So then under the model that most councils are rolling out, then they're composting or treating food organics and garden organics together.
Yeah. And so it may not actually end up being a balanced compost system, which is what you'd get if you were home composting. You could balance those nitrogen and carbon sort of ratios and get a really nice compost result, but you're not going to be able to control that with such a large input from the community.
It's a lot more challenging to control that. That's correct. And of course, like I too am involved with YIMBY through a community organisation, and clearly the compost that YIMBY produces, and there are other organisations like YIMBY around the country, and the quality of the compost that they produce is kind of gold standard, especially here in the Shire with YIMBY. What we need, we have a huge demand for soil conditioning and for essentially mulch in our parks and gardens and elsewhere in the Shire. And maybe that's a difference we can get into throughout the course of this, but it's clear that what YIMBY produces is a fantastic grade compost that you can grow food with, you can do all sorts of things with. By combining garden and garden and food organics, then as you say, we don't have the same control to be balancing, say, those different nutrients in the way that, say, a system which only deals with food organics does. But this is the critical difference, is that while YIMBY produces fantastic compost from kitchen scraps and food organics, our task is to try and deal with garden waste as well as kitchen waste.
And I think we'll get into a bit of nitty-gritty about that stuff, because I know YIMBY's done a lot of thinking on how these waste streams could be managed across the Shire. And I guess one of the problems and one of the key components of this whole conversation is the scale of managing a whole Shire's worth of waste. And I know that also I've looked at, I'm interested in FOGO and how it's been rolled out in other places. Are there limitations to it? I know that some people have complained that the end result is not necessarily high quality, or sometimes it's contaminated. Is that a concern?
Sure. Yeah, it is a concern. A lot of shires are employing people to pick through the organic material to remove contaminants. The contaminants typically are microplastics, or could be laminated cardboard materials that could have plastics in them, could be involving PFAS if there's people are putting wax paper and such products in their FOGO bins. Yeah, it is. But again, I come back to that point, like what someone like YIMBY can produce is quite a different end product to what a shire might produce with a FOGO system.
Lucy, have you read much about other FOGO systems and the end product, what that looks like sometimes?
Yeah, and I guess as a YIMBY team, we haven't been to a lot of facilities, but we have been to some. We've also been, I guess, in my earlier work with Growing Abundance, as we were the recipient of large truckloads of the product of FOGO early days, but it's a known issue that contamination is a serious issue, and that it's definitely, as Toby says, it's a very different product to what we can produce. And I guess I wanted to kind of say, this is a complex area, and I really like listening to Toby. I just so commend him and other councillors and council officers who are with the 101 things that they need to get their heads around. You've really got your head around this. We've had 6 years getting our heads around this, and been barraging councillors with all the information we can. So, I want to acknowledge the complexity of that. I think I wanted to pick up on a couple of things, like an analogy that we like to use in, acknowledging they are different products, but kind of imagining that you want to make a cake, and you just get all your ingredients together in random quantities. You might buy bulk flour, but only a little bit of fruit or the things that make the cake really nice, and then you just dump it all together in a big pile and try and make a really good cake. And what you're going to get out of it might be edible and usable, but it's not really ideal. And the other thing that you've really made clear, I think, Allie, is that faux and go are really different ingredients. And one of the things that we at YIMBY have been concerned about from the very early days, and let me just preface this by saying I've probably been one of those people in the past who's been writing to council and saying, can we please have a green bin already? And then when I started to, think about this and look at it, I realised that, and also at the time that we were starting to acknowledge that commingled recycling was a problem and that we needed to get the glass out because it was becoming like a contamination, that we started thinking, wow, putting faux and go together, both really good things to consider getting out of landfill, but if we put them together, we're actually creating a problem that we need to deal with that we didn't have. Further to that, in relation to Toby's point about the need for soil conditioner, just acknowledging that, it's great. I believe that Mount Alexander Shire Council has recently purchased a chipper which has increased their capacity to produce mulch on site rather than trucking large quantities of what people drop off at the transfer station. So the capacity to produce soil conditioner is perhaps already with us without adding the extra nutrients of faux and creating a problem. So we've always said, can we keep these two things separate? The other thing that I really want to get across is that there are large quantities, but what we know in the work of Joel Meadows over the last few months and really trawling through all the statewide data is when we put on a bin, or when councils put on a bin, there is this phenomena called what does he call it? He calls it bounce, like green waste or garden waste bounce. So this is a phenomena in the industry and across councils, and it's shown in the data that if you give people a bin, what they're putting in their bin, or in other words, the demand for the service increases by nearly 80%. So you give people a green bin. Previously, they were, chipping their garden waste, putting it in the back corner, doing any number of things with it. They didn't really have a problem with it, and suddenly they've got a bin and they want to fill it up. We also know in this shire that there's around 2,000 people that have taken the initiative to employ Greenaway, and they only deal with garden organics, and they've been operating since about 2012. So I guess we've sat back and gone, okay, we're already kind of dealing with that. Garden organics are not the big producer of methanes. There'll be a little bit if there's leaves and so on, but they're mostly carbon-based. We can process them at the transfer station already. Greenaway's collecting some. Garden contractors are collecting them. They're already going to the transfer station. Some households dealing with them on site. They're not really so much of a problem, but if we give people a bin, they're all going to start coming out. It's like bring out your dead. They're all going to start arriving on the curbside. So yeah. I wanted to make sure that we kind of understood some of the reasons why we were saying, can we just go slow? Can we try and think about a system that keeps them separate so that we can combine them and make a really nice compost / cake?
Selectively combine them. Yeah. Yeah, there are some really good points. And I feel like maybe we should explain a little bit about YIMBY now, because we've talked about the FOGO system. And so YIMBY is a community group that you helped start with Joel, who you mentioned earlier. And YIMBY means yes in our backyard. And you started it around 2020, is that right? Yeah,
that's right. And it was actually in the early days as well. I remember it was a kitchen table conversation. It was also Terry White, who's instigated a lot of stuff in this community, and Bill Grant as well, who has a long history in soil regenerative work and has also been a strong advocate for FOGO for 25 years. So, we were kind of, I'm on the community side, Joel's the permaculture educational side, and then we've got our scientist and Terry White, who's a big systems thinker. we all wanted to do something because we were aware of this issue for a long time. And I guess the other part of this that it's important to mention, I think, that I was probably the advocate for it in those early days was because I've always been interested in relocalisation, that this is not just about waste, it's about well-being and communities being involved in how we can go forward, what the future looks like, what are the systems that we might need if everything collapses. Not that I'm a prepper or doomsdayer, but if you have any awareness of
well, we've seen a couple of those shocks already with
We
COVID
have.
was one
Yep.
of those shocks, and then so is this oil crisis currently, and both times people are stockpiling tins of food. And these are everyday people. They're not preppers or doomers either. But they're like, oh, things could get tight. They could get a lot more expensive or scarce. So let's put the tins of baked beans in the cupboard. Heinz, I think, was talking about this incredible increase in purchasing. And so people do know that. And I think one of the benefits of local composting is that you then get healthier gardens where people can grow their own fruit and veg if they need to.
Yep.
Better.
Yeah. And so, we know that bringing people together and connecting people is, it's a human thing. It's really important. But I guess also having thought about the types of activities that governments and councils, because this is people didn't suddenly arrive at this realisation. There's been multiple efforts of governments over the years of trying to increase the level of home composting, because home composting is just universally acknowledged as the gold standard, the closer you're...
But also really difficult. I remember council was offering free composting bins and free worm farms and all this stuff to try and encourage people to compost at home.
Yeah.
But unless you know how to do it well, it just ends up a bit of a skanky mess sometimes. My efforts at composting were very poor. But one of the main benefits that really got me hooked into YIMBY was the educational aspect. So you guys taught us how to compost really well.
So we acknowledge that, let's just say there are some home composters that have really got it worked out.
Yes.
And there are also some medium-scale composters in this community that I won't name because I haven't got their permission to name them, but there's some people that have been collecting from half a dozen cafes for more than a decade and are processing huge quantities every week. But if we look at the previous attempts to do this, they were often without adequate support. So it's great to give someone a subsidised compost bin, but unless they really know what to do with it. So we were also aware at that time, people were saying, oh, have you heard of Share Waste? Have you heard of Share Waste? So this was this app, which actually since FOGO has now disappeared. They couldn't justify their existence anymore. So people were saying, oh, there's this great app that connects people with food scraps with people that want to compost them. So that was our early research, and we contacted everyone that was on the Share Waste app, and they all said, yeah, we're registered because we want to compost, but people don't know we're here, so it's not successful. So what we wanted to do was to connect, acknowledge that not everyone wants to compost, not everybody can compost, but let's seek out those that are motivated to compost. And then, as you've already alluded to, once you do want to compost, you realise that you need ingredients. And especially if you want a hot compost, which we don't use what's normally known as a hot composting method, where you need to gather a cubic metre of materials all in one go and then kind of turn it about 6 times. Joel, over many years, had honed this continuous hot composting system, which means that you can build a pile in about 6 weeks. But in order to do that, you need to get around 30 to 50 kilograms of food scraps every week to feed that for 6 weeks to maintain the momentum. So most households don't produce that amount. Let's give that quantity of scraps to the people that are motivated and are keen, and let's support those people really well. So we've honed over the last almost 6 years. We kind of know what people need to know. We've honed that onboarding system where, yes, people have to be trained, although now as we're getting people signing up more quickly than they have before to be composters. Some of those people have been composting for years, and now they're going, oh, okay, I think I want to come on board with YIMBY. So our onboarding is actually speeding up.
Because they don't need as much training.
They don't need as much training. They do need some training in how we recommend to do it. And our method complies to EPA recommendations. So we're actually meeting at least the temperature of 55 degrees, sustained for at least 3 to 5 days. And mostly we find that it's sustained throughout the whole 6 weeks. And that means that any pathogens that come into the system are dealt with, and it's turned twice over that time. But back to our onboarding, they have the training, then they get the information, they can go and visit some other composters to assess for themselves, is this something I really want to do, I can commit to? Because once the composters come on, they are committing to a weekly job for the rest of their lives, no, for the duration.
And I guess the key component, what you're saying here, is once you've approached your neighbours to ask them if they want to contribute their food scraps. So the people in your neighbourhood who can't or don't want to compost will offer their food scraps to you once a week in a little bucket. And so it is that beautiful pairing of people who can't or won't and people who really want to. But once you've got those people on board, it's really hard to take a week off if you're the composter, because you've offered a service and you want to maintain that.
So some of what YIMBY does, some of the core or administrative parts of YIMBY are making sure, because composters do need time off. They get sick, someone in their family gets sick.
They need a holiday.
So now we have a critical mass of composters. There's currently 53 active composters. There's 10 in training, which means that they'll come on in the next few weeks.
And each of those composters has like 10 to 15 households contributing.
And some have more.
Yeah.
And so it means we've got flexibility in the system. It means that, my mum's sick, I need to go and visit her, and I'm overwhelmed. I say, hey, can anyone do my collection this week? We connect people with some of the hard work of turning the compost. There's many which ways. We ask people to put their holiday plans forward so that we can plan ahead and make sure we've got the system covered. So it's pretty comprehensive. And so in terms of the trade, like back to that point of we've tried to do many things like this before and they didn't work. It's like, I don't think they've been tried. Community scale composting hasn't really been tried with this level of support. So there's apprenticeship program. We collect, right from day one, we've collected really comprehensive data. So we can actually do a desktop review and say, Allie hasn't put her data in for the last 4 weeks. Is she going okay? Because as you'll know, you have to log your temperatures so that we can see remotely and go, she hasn't been getting up to temperature. What's going on? Do we need to go and check in? So we've kind of built in some fail-safe methods. I did want to say one thing, picking up on Toby saying there's, and I'm not having a go at you. It's just, to the best of our knowledge, there actually isn't anyone else doing what we're doing. Most people have an idea of community composting, of that model of collecting, aggregating all the resources, and then people coming along volunteering at like a community garden or something like that. Or there are business models. There are definitely people doing neighbourhood collections, taking it to a centralised place that may or may not be licensed, and processing there. So because we've always had this dual aim of connecting people, building community resilience, having an awareness of well-being, it's not just about the compost, it's about both. That's kind of how our decentralised neighbourhood-based composting program, and we have been contacted by people from overseas. Yesterday I spent a couple of hours with someone from Canberra that wants to do this. Yeah, it's quite a unique thing and special thing that we have established here.
Yeah, that's great. So we've discussed how the FOGO bins work and also how YIMBY works. Let's talk about this moment in time and this discussion about whether or not to introduce FOGO bins. I know that the state government is sort of setting targets and goals that the Shire Councils are asked to meet. Toby, do you want to talk to that, what the state government's doing? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So, and again, this is quite long-standing. So this goes back to 2014. Well, greenhouse gas from landfill is part of that net zero commitment that we, as a state, made over 10 years ago. And so at the moment, there is legislation, and broadly, it's about introducing kerbside glass. We haven't touched on glass. That's not part of the discussion today, but it's actually important in the broader context of this because there are two changes to our waste collection which the new Act will mandate. And one is to collect glass, as Lucy mentioned before, getting glass out of commingled. There's a whole hour to talk about commingled issues, isn't there? But we'll put that to one side for today. So separating glass from commingled, and the other one is food and garden organics. And so our Shire have taken the organisation has a position that it is much smoother to try and make one behaviour change rather than staggering this as staggering. And in the Act, we have to get glass out of commingled 2027, and so we feel like working on FOGO and glass all at once is going to be a smoother rollout for the community than trying to stagger it. That said, we are aware that there is some room for negotiation with the state government. We understand that. It is fundamentally about getting organics out of landfill and ipso facto greenhouse emissions reduced out of landfill.
So they're not saying you have to have a bin. They're just saying get it out one way or another.
I couldn't comment on how firm. Yeah, that's for them. Look, there's been a lot in the news lately about glass and different issues, which again we will spend the rest of the time just talking about that. But to come back to sort of first principles, I think like we often think of like reduce, reuse, recycle, and in that order. And for me, one of the big concerns about what we're doing now, and from the Shire, and this follows on from a point that Lucy made, I'll try and make it really succinct, is at the moment we have a lot of households across the Shire who are mulching down their garden waste at home. And for me, as someone with a kind of a soil science kind of permaculture background, that's just a great outcome, right? If you can leave your lawn clippings, if you can leave your rose clippings, your hedge clippings, and you can use them in your garden, that's great for humus, it's great for soil accretion, it's great for hydrology in so many ways. So a lot of conversations I'm having at the Shire at the moment are around how do we satisfy the state government demands of trying to encourage a wide uptake of FOGO treatment, of getting FOGO out of landfill, but at the same time protecting what are actually really positive environmental outcomes in our Shire. And there's an awareness there that perhaps the data for statewide might not always apply to our Shire. We hear these figures of around 10% of Victorian homes compost, for example.
That includes inner city
including
apartment
everyone.
Dwellers. And
I don't even know how reliable that figure is, but a lot of us use that sort of 10%. I think in the Shire it's fair to suggest that those rates of home composting are significantly higher. We know as we move out anecdotally from the middle of our town that people are giving their food and food scraps to chooks and pigs and so on. We know that there's some really innovative and individual responses to the environmental need. And we also know that for a lot of Shire residents, reduce, reuse, recycle is a really key part of how we live our lives. That said, and aware of the excellent work that YIMBY does, we need to provide a system that can cater for over 8,000 households in the Shire, not just the 20 to 30 to 40% of those of us who are focused on these issues, but to people for whom this is not a passion, right? Who are currently putting kitchen scraps in landfill. And this is a big behaviour change, right? Like it's I like to think that my household is pretty switched on in terms of stuff. I still end up with corn husks and whatnot ending up in landfill. My mea culpa, it is actually quite a big behaviour change. So one of the advantages of a rollout like this is that education and behaviour change opportunity that it presents.
You mentioned 2027 as a state government kind of a time stamp, because that seems to be what the impetus behind this right now. Instead of going slow on introducing these things or
Right.
taking other avenues towards education.
Right, and most local government areas across Victoria have already implemented their FOGO bin service, and so we have lessons we can learn from those that have done it more successfully and perhaps those that have been less successful in achieving those targets. But yeah, as I understand it, so we have the glass is needs to be separated from commingled 2027. The standards, though, so the actual kind of particular guidelines around how we implement that, how we achieve those outcomes have yet to be signed off. So in a way, we're still kind of waiting for more information from the state. But we do feel like fundamentally that to try and ask the community, aware that there's a significant proportion of the Shire who are not focused on these issues daily, right? And in order to achieve separating glass and picking up food and garden organics, or getting food and garden organics out of landfill, to make one behaviour change, we feel is going to be a lot more effective than trying to make multiple changes over many years.
Yeah, gotcha. Lucy, did you want to say something on this?
Oh, so much.
So much.
I guess one of the first things I wanted to say was, I guess we've had the luxury of time to, talk to our local member. We had the Environment Minister visit here to talk about, and we were able to ask specific questions about the Circular Economy Act, under which the service standard frameworks and the regulatory side of things is held. And, we just keep getting the message that if there's a way that Mount Alexander Shire can, I guess, meet the spirit of the Act or the intention of the Act, which is to remove as many organics from landfill as possible, or to contribute to the statewide target of removing 50% of the 2020 baseline data, then that's great, and it always makes good sense. This is a statewide experiment to have an outlier so that, not everybody's doing the same thing, because how do you assess it if everybody's doing the same thing? And so there's that. And so the initial act, just for clarity, was for 2030. And then the state government said, well, we're doing really well at rolling out FOGO. Most councils now have rolled it out. So let's bring it forward to 2027, which then created...
So they feel confident they're already pretty much hitting those targets as a state.
I'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
I guess one of the things I wanted to also say was one of the reasons why we're doing this at the 11th hour is because we have never wanted to undermine the targets and undermine the FOGO system. If that's the best we can do, we want to be behind it.
YIMBY does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and me as a person, I've known about this issue for a while. So we haven't really spoken out before because we didn't want to undermine what could be what we actually call the lowest common denominator. How can we service the 20%, often bandied about 20% of people that are not going to come on board? So we're talking about designing a really big multi-million-dollar system to perhaps service the 20%. The other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly from the Auditor General's report of how Victoria's going on its targets, Victoria's going really well on the target of rolling out the 4-bin system. Big tick. What is not going well is understanding if that's actually removing organics from landfill.
Right. Auditor
General says no data, not available, status unclear. So it's kind of this perverse thing that the target, instead of it being recognised as one strategy of removing organics from landfill, it kind of the whole target became about rolling out a 4-bin system rather than the aim.
The underlying aim, which is to remove organics
so
from landfill.
So it's kind of this perverse situation. And again, that may well be, the data's not in yet, but there haven't actually been any regulatory requirements for councils. There's no consistent way of meeting data, and so that's one of the things that we recognise and go, what the heck? Yeah. We're not even really measuring this. And not only that, as Toby said, the service standards haven't been framed out. And in the mix, and this is not a state government bash, I don't know, we're living in really difficult times. But the organisation Recycling Victoria and also Sustainability Victoria, who are mandated with compliance and regulating this, have been abolished. So we're kind of in this really strange situation where councils have been directed to do this thing, and the state government infrastructure under it is just evaporated. So we don't know, we could go to all of this effort, essentially undermine a really functioning composting system, and there's more to that. The scalability issue is really important, and I'd be really happy to talk about that.
I'd like to come to that, but I think Toby would like to say something.
My understanding is that, and you're right about recycling and sustainability, Vic, but my understanding is those programs are brought back within Department of Environment, so I'm not...
Under the EPA, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, EPA. So I'm not quite... Yeah. So it just...
Hasn't evaporated entirely.
No, not at all. But it's uncertain, I guess, is the point I was wanting to make.
Yeah. And Lucy's point about the poverty of data sets is a really important one here. And it's not just Australia. There are lots of places it's difficult to find good data. And there are places where we have very good data, though. So we can actually have really good bin audits. We've been working off this bin audit of ours from a few years ago. Again, it's imperfect. It's not a perfect bin audit, but it shows some pretty good work. That around 30% of the volume of the landfill bins is currently organics, right? Kitchen and garden organics, and this is really key. I think, like when we think about, we're looking at somewhere like around 1,000 metric tons. If that's right, if we work off that, that's about 30%. And with that kind of...
In what time frame is 1,000 metric tonnes?
Per year. So 1,000 metric tonnes per year of organic material going into our landfill. And that's not just the cost in terms of greenhouse emissions, it's also the cost in terms of dollars and cents. It costs us considerably more to process landfill than it does to process, or what we project it will cost to process food and garden organics. So I think coming back to the first principle here, it's about trying to reduce that 30% to under 15%, to try and get half of that out of landfill. And so, again, for those who contribute to YIMBY, for perhaps people like us, people listening to Saltgrass, perhaps we're not putting grass clippings and organic waste in our landfill bins, but we know through our bin audits, and we see it from data across the state, that lots of people do, and so it's about driving that behaviour change.
And so I just wanted to add to that. I know we're getting into data now, but our campaign at the moment is, we've kind of got a 4Ds campaign. One is to introduce some doubt into what's the trajectory of FOGO, to ask for a delay so that we can gather some more robust data and then deliberate on that, get a really great community engagement process happening, and then design our system. But in terms of the doubt around the data, yes, there was a waste audit in 2022 that said we had about 24% of food in organics and about 9% of garden organics. We've already talked about the bounce that we can expect. We can expect an 80% increase in garden organics coming to the curbside if we give them a bin that probably won't be going into landfill. So what we're looking at is potentially get down to 12% of food organics in landfill. We know that YIMBY is currently processing around 14% of the Shire's food organics, and we also know that waste audits, how you do a waste audit, is really important. So that was a broad scale, and it's the accepted method of waste audit, and we're saying, can we do better than that? Because it's essentially a truck that collected from 160 odd households and all put into one truck. Those households were from Guildford, they were from Campbell's Creek, they were from Castlemaine. We don't have enough data to say if there were 2 bins in there that were full of food scraps, it would have completely skewed the data. So let's get some granular data, and there are accepted methods for doing that might be a little more difficult to organise, but I think it's warranted here. And let's also differentiate between Castlemaine, Campbell's Creek and the outlying areas that maybe do have larger properties and can process stuff. So we'd love to see some more granular data that can actually convey what the demand is, because we think that any good service needs to be evidence-based rather than relying on data that puts Melbourne together with Mount Alexander Shire. And since I've mentioned Melbourne, it just reminds me to say that, yay for Mount Alexander Shire, we're actually only, we already have really low landfill rates. We're second in the state, and Melbourne's number one in lowest contributors to landfill. So we're actually already doing really well, and we could be investing a huge amount of the community's resources, money, and also resources that, may be better used in other priority areas in rolling out a system that's not necessarily needed and not necessarily going to have a really strong impact in bringing down those methane emissions.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, guys. We've only got about 3 minutes left. I was going to ask, because I feel like the conversation around this is really about how do we provide a service to every household in the Shire. But we may not have time to really cover it in depth. But I
think I can spend 1 minute in saying,
Go.
because one of the biggest questions YIMBY has had is about the scalability, and Toby mentioned it as well. There's around 8,000 ish households that have a bin service. There's others that don't, but there's a misconception that YIMBY's petitioning because we're all concerned about YIMBY. No, we're actually concerned about how do we imagine a local FOGO and GO processing system. What if we could actually imagine this together? We've had 4 farmers come forward and say we'd love to do some on-farm trials. We reckon that if we got one farm on board,
do you mean large scale acceptance?
Medium scale.
Okay.
We could potentially double overnight the community's processing capacity of FOGO. And it may not be as neat or as convenient as a one-size-fits-all approach across the state, but it might just work here if we've got at least a couple more years to trial some of these things. And that's essentially what we're asking for.
I'm aware of the time. We haven't talked about how we support YIMBY and home composters and opt-outs. So a big part of our conversation on council now is how do we provide a universal system that doesn't squash or impact the business model, if you'll pardon that phrase, for an organisation like YIMBY,
Yeah.
right? So we get it if we give everyone a green bin and it's much more convenient. So we're really engaged in that question of opt-outs, how we can encourage people to join a program like YIMBY, which can produce far better quality compost.
It's obviously going to be an ongoing conversation, and council is yet to have the conversation and take a vote on anything. But YIMBY is very active at the moment and asking for people to sign a petition just to say go slow on FOGO, not no FOGO, just go slow. So that's the state of play at the moment. We are at the end of the hour. I appreciate you both so much for coming in. It's been a really great conversation. I
Thanks,
think it's
Allie.
been really helpful, and hopefully people have gotten a lot out of hearing this chat.
Salt of the earth. Salt. Grassroots. Salt of the earth people. Grassroots change.
Saltgrass. Listen to all episodes of Saltgrass on your podcast app or at saltgrasspodcast.com.